Hey everybody, it's Chris and Rick Talk Guitars, and recently we did an episode on Crossroads, the blues movie, and it got me thinking about the blues. I have always been fascinated with the blues. I love the blues, but I've always been fascinated by about the evolution of that genre or that idiom, I should say, I guess. I don't know, whatever the term is. But, because as a kid, I came to the blues through other artists, right? Like Clapton or Hendrix or, those cats. And then they talked about their influences and boom, then I went back to Robert Johnson and Howlin' Wolf and all these people. And so that was that's my, how I just, the path to discovery that I took to get to the blues. But I've always been fascinated by how the blues has evolved into kind of this gunslinger genre now. I know there are other blues artists, but the ones that seem to get the most press or attention are kind of the gunslinger people in that genre. And I find it fascinating. So Chris and I thought we'd talk about it and just give our takes on that. So Chris, that's kind of my setup. What's your take on that?
Oh, Jesus. I know when you were saying that, it
Stepping into the
reminded me,
mud.
if you have it, I'm going to lend you this book and required reading that I keep
Sweet.
mentioning anytime we talk about anything to do with the blues
Awesome.
is Robert Palmer's Deep Blues book. It's a musicology.
Sweet.
Like doesn't matter what type of music it is. Musicology is just something I'm way into. And that will tell you a lot of how shit evolved from that. And I too
Nice.
am fascinated by that. So I'm going to give you that
Yeah.
right off the bat because it's just fascinating reading that book and then wanting to learn and listen to a bunch of blues.
Uh-huh.
I just thought blues like just about anything else. I thought this is blues, this shuffle little thing. It's like that, and that's like what it is. It's a series of notes that you put together, these little licks, and you make them sound like blues. And it was like jazz or something. I didn't really pay that much attention to it. And actually, in later years, hip hop is a lot like that. It's like from the
Yeah.
from a superficial level, you're like, it all sounds the same,
Yeah.
jazz or whatever. But once you become a lover of that style of music and you're able to just start to consume the nuances of it and see these things and maybe read about some of the musicology and how this stuff came about, you get to appreciate that. And then you learn like, this absolutely does not sound the same. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Reading deep blues caused me to go into this rabbit hole of learning about and listening to all these artists. And that's when I got to be this annoying person, was like kind of this gatekeeper guy that said, that's not blues. This is blues. That's not blues. This is blues. And luckily I got through that annoying period. But for me, how it changed, I know this is our super winded way of answering your question, is I just started to pay more attention to it. I mean, I started to,
Yeah.
evolve for me. And I did notice the gunslinger element coming in pretty quick. And interestingly enough, for me,
Uh,
I attribute a lot of that to, like, I think Jimi Hendrix, who is awesome. I mean, he's like a force of nature, something that changed music forever. I'm not saying anything negative about him,
yeah.
but he took the guitar and he put it out front in a way that somebody who doesn't even know anything about guitar, they can look at him and know he's doing something amazing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it kind of upped the bar. You got to blow people's minds. And I
Yeah.
think in blues music, even though showmanship was always there and guitar players were really great at showmanship and really great player guitars and they were into solos and signature licks, it didn't become so over the top and so much like you are just kind of existing in this song just to present your solos. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just like
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
those are my
Exactly.
trademarks or whatever.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was more like a self-contained thing, I mean? That
Yeah.
all came out of like the licks and the rhythms and all this stuff just were one thing. And then it kind of evolved almost like, another sports analogy, I guess. I don't know. It's different for everybody. I'm going to go ahead and say that right now because the
Yeah.
way that I say that I think that my relationship with blues music, country music, jazz music, or wherever, it's personal. It's deep,
Yeah.
it's personal. So it's like things that I think that really move me that I associate with the blues are going to be stuff that now nobody else thinks of. I mean, I think the
Yeah.
first few PJ Harvey records for me are the blues. I mean, that's like the kind of rhythmic, dark thing that, I don't know. I don't even know what I'm trying to say. I can only speak to some of the elements that appeal to me personally, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm
Well, I
just
think
throwing it
that's
over to you.
a great way to couch it is that we all have different relationships to whatever genre we're talking about, but blues in particular, everybody has a different relationship to that genre. You have a different one. I have one. Somebody else does too. But I just always found it fascinating that I remember kind of when the old blues cats kind of got a revival and they were playing colleges and stuff like that. It struck me that it didn't seem like there were a lot of other people coming up behind them to pick up the mantle of that genre. And I was fascinated by that. It's like, why? And there certainly were, but not a lot. And like you said, I think maybe just music from that genre took a different turn. Like it got into hip hop and R&B and different things, and maybe just became other things. But I kind of was the artists I'm drawn to, and I wouldn't say I think there's different a spectrum, right? There are purists who think of the blues as an acoustic guitar and a slide on your pinky and blah blah blah, and then
As
there
in
are
any genre, yeah.
yeah, and then and then there's a spectrum of it from that on up. But I'm always drawn to artists who kind of incorporated the blues into their style, like, the bands that come to my mind are Hendrix, for instance. And he
Mhm.
even said overtly, this is this psychedelic weird blues thing we're doing. And Zeppelin, I think, incorporated blues into their sound in a really cool way, a really melodic way that I really dig. And then, many other bands. And then there were more traditional bands like Canned Heat kind of comes to mind. I kind of dug them. But yeah, like you, I kind of went through a phase where it's like, oh, that's not the blues or this isn't the blues. But then I stepped back and said, well, I mean, I still kind of feel that way maybe about some artists or some interpretations of that genre, but
Oh yeah,
I
that's
certainly don't
human
think,
nature.
yeah, but I certainly don't think, it's rarefied and only certain people should be able to play that music, because it,
No.
it appeals to so many people. And if it speaks to you, play it and do it however you see fit. But the gunslinger thing too, I think that's kind of a detour or could be considered a detour from kind of, the blues because some really technical players get kind of put into that genre and stuff like that, which I don't really consider,
No, the
the
gunslinger, is that what
blues.
you're saying?
Yeah.
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 Think of
Yeah.
somebody like Albert Collins. He was
Yeah.
definitely coming from a gunslinger kind of
Yes.
like he had his
Yes.
capoed Telecaster and he was like really showy. And there was another dude, I think he might have been a Chicago blues guy that was really into super long chords. And that was his thing.
Yeah.
I mean, he would go out in the audience. Sometimes he'd go out in the street and he'd play. So it was always like a lot of showmanship and
Yeah.
stuff like that. But
Yeah.
but you're right. It wasn't so technical, like how many notes can you play? Or it wasn't so
Yes.
much. It seems to me that a lot of people, and this is normal, and this is what we all do as guitar players, but it seems a bit more prominent in some of the modern blues, is you have your lick library, right? You
Yeah.
have all these
Yeah.
classic licks that you come, and then you just sprinkle them out through songs. You know what I mean? And they're kind of like some of the biggest blues cliche licks right now weren't cliches back in the day, but they
Right.
just get, they get overused. And some of those other people back in, like I mentioned, like Albert Collins and whatnot, they were just playing from the gut, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was different every time. And it wasn't, they did have their own personal lick libraries, and that was their essence.
Yeah.
And I just thought of something really interesting. Who was it? Who was that? What was that guy's name? That blues guy's name? John Mayer. Is that his name? John
John.
Mayer?
Yeah. The
Jo-
young dude.
okay, yeah, because
Yeah.
he's kind of does this blues thing. And I'm not really familiar with his music, but I've heard enough of it to
Yeah.
do everything I can in my power to make sure I have to listen to a lot of it again. But anyway, I saw a little quick video of him, and he was doing this. He was talking. He had a guitar, and he was talking in front of an audience, I guess.
Uh-huh.
And he was doing these licks of all these famous blues guitar players, and every single one of them, he was fucking nailing. I mean,
That's cool.
he totally gets this guitar. He gets that. He's got every like characteristic of that guitar player, and he does the music that doesn't really appeal to me.
Yeah.
So he gets that, and that's what's interesting
Yeah.
about this. He gets that, and he filters it through his experience, his blues experience, and then he comes up with this music that is like nothing like I would ever imagine that came from that. You know what I mean? Well, it's really interesting. And you mentioned in the '70s the blues influence, and that was kind
Yeah.
of interesting. Those people, I mean, they wanted to play the blues like they were listening. They wanted to sound like these
Totally.
records, and it was impossible for them. And
Yeah.
that's what they came up with this other cool shit. And then when he started added volume to that added this other thing that made it kind of cool.
Yeah.
But it just reminded me of a saying from that time when they were starting to bring, when England was starting to bring all these American blues artists over here
Yeah.
just to play with them because they wanted to introduce people to these fabulous artists.
Yeah.
I think it was Little Walter, the harmonica player, said, those white people want to play the blues so bad, and they play the blues so bad. It's like, so it was back then. People were kind of bitching
Yeah,
about that. This
yeah.
ain't the blues, but
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought up the John Mayer thing because that's another thing I think that is so important and got kind of lost in the haze is that even in the gunslingers like Albert King, Freddie King, Albert Collins, all these guys, they had their personality shown through their playing, right? And so really, like if you heard recordings of each one of those guys, you could, and you listen to it enough, you could identify them based on just listening to them. Their
Right.
personality was coming through their playing. And to me, that's just so important. Whatever genre you're playing is if you can hone your voice and it's recognizable for the most part, that's important. And with the blues, like you're saying, there's lick libraries, and then there's just like everybody wants to get the Strat with 12s on it and play through a vibro, whatever he played through, a
Oh
vibrolux or
yeah.
a vibroverb. And then what ends up happening is you just sound like another artist that's already done that, you know? And so,
Right.
and again, I don't want to, bash anybody or come off like, I'm the old man shouting at clouds, which I am anyway,
That's me
but
24/7.
what you said is so important. And even with a genre like the blues, which is, it's a 1-4-5 for God's sake, it's either in C, D, E, or whatever. And there are some other little embellishments thrown in. But, the people I mentioned, like Albert King, for instance, his thing was just bending the shit out of a note, like octaves, right? Like he would just bend that string until it would almost break. And you
Right.
can tell his playing. And then Albert Collins was kind of the ice picky guy. He would capo on like, I don't know, the 12th fret or some
He's
crazy
like
shit.
some super six, like
Yeah.
horribly bright amp, and you just crank it. And
Yes.
he's capoed in
And
the middle of the neck. Because
exactly.
that's
And
the
then,
ice pick.
yes. And
Yeah.
then Freddie King played with like a metal finger pick and a thumb pick, and he's got this distinct sound. So the thing that I dig about, like, and I guess that's what I was looking for in terms of the evolution of this genre, is for people to pick it up and kind of put their own stamp on it, And I think what ended up happening, not wholesale, but by, like you were saying, it became kind of a cliche and kind of a joke, right? It's like, oh yeah, the blues became, and like a blues jam, right? It's like whenever anybody gets together to play, and they've never played together before, it's like, oh, let's do it blues and C. It's like
Right,
one,
right.
two, three,
Well, that's
four,
kind of yeah, no, I agree. It's universal, and it's something. It's a great tool when you're learning. It's really
Yeah.
superficially easy to get
Yes.
yourself going in the blues
Yeah.
because it's deceptively. I mean, it's a really hard to do it right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
so. It's easy to forget everybody on board, and those blues jams are just that. Everybody can communicate, which I think is super cool. One thing I just learned about if you're going to be passionate about music and you find yourself really getting into things, you're going to end up with a lot of music that you don't like, and
Yeah.
it's okay. It's
Yeah.
and I'm getting better about just kind of keeping some of my opinions to myself on this stuff. But it is, you're passionate. You're like, that sucks.
Yeah.
But it's not. I mean, we're talking about the blues. It happened to everything. I think I'm more that way about like judgy and annoying when it comes to country music because I have a huge
Oh
love for
man.
country music too. And the new
Yeah.
country music, the young country, whatever it is, it's just like soul crushing
It's
for someone.
pandering. Yeah.
But that's like this music is influencing millions of people's lives.
Yeah.
It's like Dylan to them. Some
Yeah.
of these people, believe it or not, I can't
I
believe it,
know.
but
I know.
and that's a fascinating thing. I got to think with all my
It
cynicism
is.
and all my my sarcasm, I think that's just a fantastic thing. And this is all American music too. It came from
Yeah.
this country. That might have something to it too about being judgy about some of this new blues that seems like Gunslinger, Lick
Uh-huh.
Library.
Uh-huh.
Is like, do you guys know the rich history of this?
Yeah.
Where this came from? Or are you just picking the stuff that's easy or whatever? But I'm sure that's not the case. And it was demonstrated in John Mayer's video. I'm like,
Yeah.
that dude knows the blues,
Yeah.
and he's got all these good. And I love it when people do that. Who's that dude that did Hot Rod Lincoln? Bill Kirchen. He in his act, he would get up there and he'd be playing the song Hot Rod Lincoln, and he would start going through all these guitar players, and while he's playing it, I mean, he'd do their
Yeah.
style, everyone from Eddie Van Halen to Roy Nichols or whatever, and he would nail those.
I love
and
it.
that's what John Mayer did, and I was very, very impressed. Like,
Yeah.
this, it's easy for cynics like us to go listen to his music that he's making. It's like, that dude doesn't know what the blues is, I
Yeah.
mean, it's like
Yeah.
he doesn't have the blues, or I guess we kind of tend to like it more when they do something with it, like the Black Keys or the White
Yeah.
Stripes, to mention
Yeah.
Black and White.
Yeah.
They definitely get the blues, and they have that blues thing going on, and it's kind of different, especially at the time. So I don't know. It's really fascinating. The more I talk about this, I was a little bit worried because I didn't want to be like the old white guys talking about like who can play the blues or not.
Right.
But it's way more than that. It's just music in general. I mean, jazz. I had the same
Yeah.
problem with jazz. When I was playing guitar in high school, I'm like, I think I should explore jazz. I'm a guitar player. I want to
Yeah.
learn more about jazz. I went right for like El Di Meola, and I'm like, what the fuck is this? I'm like, me no like, and I
Yeah,
put it
yeah,
away
yeah.
for a long time, and then years later, I like found out what actually started listening to like horn players and found out what
Oh
jazz
man.
really was,
Yeah.
and then now I have this appreciation for it. I know what it is.
Yeah. No, and I'm glad you brought that up because again, like I've been watching all these interviews with Miles Davis and whatever, he's a can of worms, but as a musician and his thoughts about music, and he was pretty amazing because this interviewer tried to corner him and say, I'm going to get in trouble here, Miles, but why do black people play the blues better than white people? And Miles kind of looked at him like confused, like, what are you talking about, man? My daddy's rich and my mama's pretty, and I've never suffered a day in my life, and I can play the blues,
Right.
and I don't intend to suffer. And so it was really cool for him to push back on somebody's stereotypical perception of music or a type of music, and to have the artist be thoughtful enough. He was a thoughtful dude, man. He wasn't just answering. He wasn't just like he didn't just have pat answers for people. He thought about the question and gave you his opinion about it. And same with young, people used to say, well, why don't you use all these old jazz guys and stuff? He goes, man, I want to use whoever can bring the stuff. And so if this young cat can bring the stuff, I want him in my band. And he was always pushing forward too. He never wanted to rest on his laurels, or, he talked about like people, kind of emulating older jazz players. And he goes, that's bullshit, man. You gotta do your own shit. You gotta bring your own shit to this stuff and keep moving it forward. And I really appreciated that. And I guess that's what kind of sticks in my mind with genres, or whether it's a blues or not, is just like being brave enough to just kind of keep pushing yourself in a direction that is trying to discover new things about it. And so I really
Right.
thought that was cool.
For me and my approach to everything has always been, I love this kind of music, but I can't play it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take elements that I love from it and kind
Yeah.
of put it into my playing. Because I mean, the only time I ever really find myself playing straight blues is when I'm goofing around because it's look, and it is in that context of look, I've got the blues. It's like I shouldn't be playing this because I don't have the blues, but at the same time, I'll do a song that has maybe a mellow guitar part, or a guitar part that definitely derived itself from the blues, and
Yes.
my influence
Yes.
of listening to music. And I mentioned earlier, I mean, listen to the 4-track tapes of PJ Harvey. There's a lot of
Yeah.
blues in there. You know what I mean? It's guttural, dark, and there's millions of bands that did that. I like it when people take elements and do something with it, but I don't know. I've changed my tune over the years. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that's important too. And I think if you're just halfway aware as you grow as a person, you start to think about that stuff, about not being, you still have your strong opinions about stuff, but you try to couch it in a way that is a little more thoughtful, right? Exactly. Because I mean, when I was young, I was a long-haired, pimply-faced rocker, and there's no way in hell I could admit to my friends that I liked Earth, Wind, and Fire, or
Right.
any of this music that wasn't considered, rock or macho
Oh,
rock. And so I think it is important as you grow older just to like acknowledge the fact that, you can still have strong opinions about music, but don't express it in a way that is kind of bombastic or hurtful to other people. Because like you said, I mean, there's a ton of people that love this new country. I, to me, it's an insult to humanity, but there are people out there that dig that stuff, man. But
it's
yeah.
like the musical Blood Eagle.
Yes, exactly. But with regard to the blues, I've just always been fascinated with that genre. And I guess that's the lesson that I've come to learn too, is that there's room for everything in the spectrum with a genre that's been around a long time, right? Like look at rock and roll. I mean, that's kind of a combination of, what country and or what is that? I don't know. Rhythm, blues, and go ahead.
Right. It's all the merging country. But
Yeah,
you mentioned
yeah.
that, and I just thought of something really that just popped in my head right now. That was also the story with rock and roll, too. I'm sure that when we got to the point of like the 50s turning in the 60s and we started to get some of these hard rockers, they're like, that doesn't sound like Bill Haley. That's not rock and roll.
Right,
You know what I
right.
mean? So it's just a part of music, and being a music
Yeah.
fan, and being passionate about music, it's like you get feel protective of these things. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You go through stages when you're a hard rocker, like my path anyway. It's just like, yeah,
Uh-huh.
if it doesn't rock, disco sucks, all this sort of stuff. And then you get a little bit more intelligent as you get older and get more information. But then you become like this, it's like everything I like musical is very carefully curated. And I don't want anybody to think that I don't like anything. You know what I mean? So if
Right,
you want
right,
to, like
right.
someone's having a conversation about this band, what you have to do is you mention like, I'm going to talk about blah, 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 but I'm not a fan, but, you have to
Yeah,
point
yeah,
out that you don't really like them
yeah,
because you don't
yeah.
want it to call your carefully curated sense of music into question. So that was
Yeah,
definitely me for a while. And then once I realized, I don't have to separate my childhood music that I loved from this, the college rock that I love from
yeah,
the all-time classic stuff that I loved or anything new that I love. And music became a lot more fun. I know.
yeah,
And now
yeah,
that's all I get kind of snarky about is just the stuff that's just not to my taste. And it's like
yeah.
so far not to my taste.
Yeah, I agree. What I was saying too about genres is, what happens is it just becomes this, well, it turns into subgenres, right? Like blues, for instance, there's traditional blues, or rock, right? There's post modern punk. There's all these genres of this one,
Psychobilly.
yeah, psychobilly that used to be
Because
one
rockabilly
genre.
wasn't crazy enough.
Right, right, right. Now we got to have psychobilly.
Right.
Yeah, so I mean that's another thing that you start to learn too is like, well, just over time, this genre's been around forever, and now it's kind of morphed into other things. But yeah, it fascinates me, especially the blues, because I have such a fondness for all the old blues people that came through, from the Delta to Texas to Chicago. And I guess, yeah, for some artists, like you say, exactly, it's a lot of artists pick up on that third generation or fourth generation or whatever, right? Because they're the person they like, who may be a contemporary artist, is steeped in these old artists, and they love those old artists. And so, but I guess I appreciate people with once they know that they go back and listen to that stuff that informed the artists they like. And because that was the fun part for me. I'd never heard of Robert Johnson until I heard these conversations about from Hendrix and Clapton and all these guys. Oh yeah, you got to, and then you listen to Robert Johnson and you're like, oh my God, that
Right.
guy was incredible. And like you say, you get more of a feeling for what that original blues was all about. Once you find that stuff out, hopefully that informs you as an artist and you can put your own stamp on it or whatever. But I think knowing that stuff is just kind of it's valuable to
Yeah.
know.
Sometimes it's hard to remember that some people's relationship with music is different too. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It means different things. And with any style of music, if you said,
Yeah.
what are give me your top 10 blues players, it's going to be totally different from
Yeah.
anybody. Same with country. If someone's
Yeah.
hasn't really listened to old country, you're going to hear a lot of things that like, wow, you think that's country? And it's just, in a way, it's fascinating. It's just part
Yeah.
of this country's rich musical heritage. And what's interesting too, when you go back to the 70s, all those the 60s and 70s people who are way into our American music, blues being one of them.
Yeah.
Like take the Rolling Stones when they came over. One of the things on one of their early tours that they really wanted to go, we want to go to Chess Studios. So they went to
Right.
Chess Studios, and they're in there, and there's like some guy painting the ceiling. It's fucking Muddy Waters. He's in there working like as a laborer in
It's
the
his day
studio.
job. Yeah.
And that's where they got their name from, Muddy Waters. So
Yeah.
they knew, they're like, why don't you people like this music? This is crazy.
Yeah.
Oh, we're going to bring these fuckers over to the UK. If you guys don't appreciate it. But we have a tendency to realize that people did. There was a huge folk blues
Yeah.
movement here in the
Yeah.
60s too. And a lot of people did, but not like it became rock star from the UK's version of it. That's where
Yeah.
you got the original rock star, the big excess rock star stuff
Yeah.
came from. So it's
But
fascinating. This shit is all fascinating to me.
Yeah, but that's a great point too about how, like, in the States at least, rock and roll and the blues kind of fell out of favor, and then it was picked up by Europeans and then brought back in a new way, right? Through the British invasion and all this other stuff. And I think that's kind of fascinating, right? Because like guys like Clapton and those Peter Green and all these other guys, they were, but I guess that's what fascinates me is like I guess in America is we are flighty and we're very trendy and we're very short. We have short attention spans. So I
What?
guess it doesn't surprise me too much that this genre that was, created in our country became passe, and then some other people found it and said, this is gold. This is why, like you're saying, like why aren't these guys all playing? And then there's the racial aspect of it too, right? I mean, white artists were picking up the blues, and rightfully so. Like guys like Buddy Guy were very resentful because it's like, these guys are out there making a bunch of money, and I'm still working the Chitlin circuit, working my ass off, and I'm playing my stuff doesn't get played on the radio, but these white artists, but
Unless it's by Led Zeppelin.
unless it's Led Zeppelin, yeah. But yeah, I was fascinated by that as a kid. It's like, why isn't this genre like, why isn't it championed more? But it just fell out of favor, and then kind of had a resurgence, like we were saying, in the 60s with colleges were, having all these blues cats and stuff. But yeah, it does fascinate me. And another thing I think about too is that there's just so much goddamn music now.
Right.
Back in the early days of rock and roll and stuff like that, there were there were a handful of genres: rock and roll, jazz, blues, R&B. I mean, country. A handful of genres. Now, and that also makes it fun and kind of frustrating at the same time, is like there's just so much music that's gone under the bridge that now it's like, oh my God, sometimes it's daunting. But yeah. Well, cool. Well, I really dug that. I think it went in a good direction. I hope you did too. And I hope you listeners think it did too. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic too, the blues. It's a big topic. It's talked about especially in guitar forums and guitar circles. So, but yeah, thanks for listening as always. Check us out on Ruinous Media. We're members of the Ruinous Media Network, and check us out on all the podcast platforms that you consume podcasts on, and keep listening. Really appreciate it. All right. Bye.
Bye.